Hi everyone, welcome back to Visually Hidden Selects. I'm Peter O'Brien, and today I would like to talk to you about Frankenstein from 1931, directed by James Whale and starring Colin Clive and Boris Karloff as Dr. Frankenstein and his monster. This film is based on a novel written by Mary Shelley, which was first published in 1818, and she wrote it when she was just 19 years old, which is pretty fascinating. And even though the film is based on the novel, it does follow the same story, but it is not a very faithful adaptation of the novel. There are a lot of differences. For example, in the novel, the creation of the monster is exceptionally vague, and it's really a centerpiece of the film. It is one of the highlights of the film. Also, in the novel, the creature himself is a little bit more articulate and a lot more violent and a lot more aggressive, whereas in the film, he's kind of almost like a newborn in that he doesn't really know or understand much of the world, and he's just kind of like fumbling his way through it, and it's only because of his physical stature and appearance that he is regarded as a monster and therefore reacts to the treatment that he receives. This was the second film in the Universal Monsters series after Dracula, which was released earlier that same year of 1931, and in fact they offered the role of Frankenstein's monster to Bela Lugosi, who had played Dracula. He wound up passing on the role for a number of reasons, mostly because the character, when he was going to be involved, was just written as a violent, angry brute, and he didn't really see much of an opportunity for his acting skills in that role. They wound up hiring Boris Karloff, and this was really his breakout role. After this, he kind of became synonymous with the horror genre. He went on to play the Mummy, also for Universal. He appeared in James Whale's follow-up film, The Old Dark House, as well as the sequel, Bride of Frankenstein. And then he, wound up being the Grinch in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, so he is the eternal boogeyman in popular culture. And not surprisingly, this film did suffer from a lot of censorship, especially in its subsequent re-releases. When it was filmed and originally released, there's a very famous line when Dr. Frankenstein has been successful in creating the monster, and he shouts, "It's alive!" There's another line that was cut out where he refers to himself as God. And it wasn't until the 1980s that that line was finally restored. There were some other subsequent scenes and sequences that were trimmed down or eliminated entirely that then finally got restored to the film. The film is called Frankenstein, the story is called Frankenstein, and that relates to Dr. Frankenstein. A lot of people like to argue about the monster's the monster, or it's Frankenstein's monster. Don't call the monster Frankenstein. And really, you take the name of your father and your family, so to call the monster Frankenstein I don't think is really a big deal. Nevertheless, the monster is not the protagonist. He is the antagonist, because the story is following Dr. Frankenstein and his creation of the monster. And especially in the novel, the main character is Dr. Frankenstein, and the monster certainly antagonizes him there. In the film, they do change the character of the monster, but at the end of the day, he is still the one wreaking havoc, causing trouble, and whether it's intentional or not, he is the monster. Of course, one of the things that really makes this particular production of Frankenstein unique is the monster, and that really boils down to the makeup. Jack Pierce is the person who invented this classic look with the flat top and the electrodes coming out of the neck, and even the gray, pale skin. The makeup took about 4 hours to apply every day, and in full costume, Boris Karloff had to lug around an additional 48 pounds. But it really added to the character and just the fumbling, laboring, walking on new legs feel that the character needed. But that's one of the more interesting things actually about this film is, yes, Frankenstein is in the public domain because the book was written in the early 1800s. Anybody can make a production of Frankenstein, but this makeup is copyrighted to Universal. So this is Frankenstein as the universal monster. That's why when you see other Frankenstein movies like Hammer's The Curse of Frankenstein, it's a completely different approach to the makeup. They don't do the flat top, they don't really do the electrodes, and if they do, they're a little bit different. Even Young Frankenstein has a slightly different approach to the monster makeup. I don't know if I have a favorite scene in this movie, but one that stands out is when you first see the monster, which is about 24 minutes into this movie, and then Dr. Frankenstein shows him the sunlight for the first time, and he reacts to it as if he's actually looking at a higher power, and then Dr. Frankenstein takes it away and just starts to kind of showcase his creation. You know, I really love what Boris Karloff does with the character in that scene and how Colin Clive and Boris Karloff work off of each other in that scene. One of the more fun contributions to this film adaptation and to the cast is Dwight Frye, who is a character actor. He appeared in Dracula earlier this same year as Renfield, and here he's playing Fritz, the hunchback helper to Dr. Frankenstein, and he brings a little bit more malicious intent. He's the one who kind of antagonizes the monster that sets him down his path of destruction. It's really just kind of a fun little character and has since become synonymous with the mythology of Frankenstein. The lab equipment in this film was built specifically for this film by a guy named Ken Strickfaden, and he used it in a number of different films throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, and he just tucked it away in his garage. And when Mel Brooks came around to do Young Frankenstein, he heard that the Frankenstein lab equipment still existed, and they got it on loan from Strickfaden to use for that film. So there's a very strong connection between those films specifically and aesthetically. Frankenstein is my favorite of the classic monsters, and especially of the Universal monsters. I love the story, and I love the presentation of the characters, and I love the themes that are in this film. It deals with a lot of different things and a lot of existential questions. Why am I here? Who made me? I also love the aesthetics in this particular film. The design of the monster is very believable. He looks like somebody that was stitched together in a lab, and I don't question for a second that he is supposed to be a monster. Meanwhile, Boris Karloff is a very articulate and well-to-do British gentleman, but he portrays the monster so sincerely and so genuinely that you just really feel a strong connection to him in a way that you don't necessarily get from other interpretations of the character or portrayals of the character. Colin Clive, who plays Dr. Frankenstein, is fantastic in this role. You can see the madness of this man. And when you get into the sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, his arc really comes full circle. I had the good fortune to see a double feature of these in the theater once, and it was just a fantastic experience on the big screen. This film really was a pioneer in the horror genre, and it's almost like a very, very dark fairy tale, and set a precedent for what could be achieved on screen. And so in that regard, I think it is kind of timeless, and it doesn't necessarily matter that it was made in the 1930s. You can throw this movie on at any time and find something to enjoy about it. So that's it for Frankenstein. I really hope you enjoy this recommendation, and if you do check it out, please leave us a comment, let us know what you think. We will be discussing it at length on the Visually Hidden Selects podcast, so be sure to tune into that. And until next time, see ya!